Hello everybody and welcome for another webinar in the Mobicon webinar series. Today we're talking about roundabouts, a very exciting topic, and we'll be hearing from our design expert Eveline de Jong. She'll be joining us in a minute to talk you through the principles of roundabout design. Before we start, a few household announcements. We'll be using Mentimeter again, so if you can go to grab one of your devices and go to menti.com, the code will show up on the PowerPoint in a second. And there, if you type in the code, you can join us. We'll be asking you a couple of questions about who's in the room, because we can't actually see you. And you'll be able to ask us questions that we'll be covering in the Q&A session after Eveline's presentation. The presentation tonight will run for about 45 minutes. There's a lot to talk about. And we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A afterwards. If you do want to leave us a question in the YouTube chat function, that's also possible. We'll do our best to get to all of them, but we might not. And there will probably be a question and answer dedicated webinar later this year. So keep your eyes peeled for that one as well. So let's get started with the first Mentimeter question to get you warmed up a little bit. And for that, we have the clicker, which classically does not seem to be working. Brilliant. So the first question, what profession do you identify with most? I struggle to ask people what you do for a job, because a lot of people have flexible interpretations of their job in their field. And today I can see you a lot of advocates. That's always good to see. And then split between traffic engineers and transport planners, few urban designers in the mix. Good to see. There will be something in it for everybody, I'm sure. It's not too technical of a presentation and very much focused on the principles, so that'll be good for all of you. And then we'll go to the next. Oh, I'm gonna. Yeah, oh, it does work. Second question, what kind of organization do you work for? So do you work for a large municipality with 100,000 or more residents, a smaller municipality, another type of government? Do you work in the private sector? Do you do research, for example, university research, institute? Do you work in advocacy, or do you have a different job altogether? And if so, what are you doing here? I see a lot of larger municipalities have joined us today, which is good. Also our colleagues from the private sector, and a lot of professional advocates, which is interesting to see. That's good. Very good. Okay, so while we get that going, the next question is, why are you here? Which aspect of roundabouts are you most interested in? Is it mostly the planning of it, so in terms of transport planning? Where do they fit? Where do they get built? And why? Is it mostly the design? What are the design details that we can use, and what do we need to keep an eye out for when designing these things? Operations, obviously, how do they work? Or do you just want to know it all? Which, not surprisingly, is a very popular option. And spoiler alert, we will be covering all of these topics, so that's nice to see. Great, so make sure you keep this open, because you can ask your questions in the Q&A function of Mentimeter throughout the presentation. And without further ado, I will now introduce you to Eveline de Jong, who will guide you through the rest of the presentation tonight. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Eveline de Jong, and I'm a designer at Mobicon. So I focus on the design of the public space, road design, but also on traffic safety. So that's why this topic of roundabouts is especially important. So today's objectives are on this slide. So first we will do an introduction on intersection design. So maybe you've already seen our webinar on intersection design. So this is just a quick heads up, or to really show you what normal intersections design is also about. Then we will explore the fundamentals of safe roundabout design, and then apply that roundabout design, the principles on a local context, but also show you what can go wrong even in the Netherlands. So, on the topic of intersection design is very important because most crashes happen on intersections. So they're the least safe point of an entire network. And also they are the bottlenecks in a network. So you have the traffic safety side of things, that's a problem, but also the bottleneck in the network, so the flow. And that's why it's important to design them safely. And if you want to design them safely for all modes, you really have to look at the most vulnerable road user. So for cyclists and pedestrians, the difference in speed between a vehicle and a pedestrian or a cyclist is way too big in a 50 kilometers per hour zone, while in 30 kilometers per hour, the probability of death is extremely lowered. So it's an exponential growth for probability. So the difference between 30 and 50 kilometers per hour can actually mean injured or death. So that's why it's very important in the design of intersections to really look at how you can slow vehicles down. For example, if you have a junction of two access roads, you want to have the turn radii to be small, so cars really have to take the tight corners, and you have to raise the junction as well, because if you raise it, then they also have to slow down and really look around and see if there are other people already on the intersection as well. When you have a junction of a distributor road and an access road, you really have to look at the point of conflict. So an access road really has the vehicles all mixed together, while on a distributor road, vehicles are separated from cyclists. At the point where they intersect, they all have to interact with each other, and it's best to do that in a slower speed than in a higher speed. So if you have a ramp there, then you can really slow down the vehicles. They can pay attention, look left and right, and see if there's any other traffic coming. And in this case, the cyclist also has priority, so it's especially important to have them in a safe space. And then we have the roundabout design, the topic of today's webinar, and why we build roundabouts and what's very useful about them. That's what we'll discuss in the principles later. But for now, just let this sink in for a bit. Traffic lights are proven to be the least safe intersection option. So we don't build traffic lights to be safe, but we build them for another reason. Traffic lights are a traffic management tool, not a safety tool. So in traffic lights we can have the flow that we want, but we don't have you don't really get the safety that you want. We can see that in the numbers as well. So here you can see in the red the four-way signalized intersection, in the pink the four-way prioritized intersection, and in green the roundabout. And on the y-axis you have the relative number of crashes per junction type. So that means that if you have a four-way signalized intersection, these are over twice as unsafe as their equivalent roundabout. So you can have the flow with a roundabout, but you also have the safety. So that's why we also want to build roundabouts. And why is it that roundabouts are more safe? So we look at the conflict areas for vehicles in this case. So if you have the intersection on the left, you have in total 32 conflict areas, while on the right, the roundabout, you have only 8. So that means significantly less conflict areas. And the conflict areas are no crossings. So you don't have any conflicts of people crossing each other and having a collision on the side. And if you look at this picture, you can see just a normal intersection with traffic lights. But if you want the most safe option, why don't you do this? This also has the same amount of flow, but because the roundabout has separated bike facilities that are in priority, so vehicles have to give way to cyclists. There's even for pedestrians that they have priority. And in this case, the flow is almost the same, while the safety significantly rises. So low speeds. Low speeds, especially in urban areas like this one. This is really a space where the speed is very, very slow, And in this case, it's so slow that we can even mix cars and cyclists in this case. So if you go a slightly higher scale, so more urban area, you really have to separate the cyclists. The speed difference is too big, even with the design of the roundabout. So we want to separate them and give them their own facility. And then this is how it works. So the cars give way to the cyclists that are there and also the pedestrians. And if a car is waiting, other cars can just pass them through. And this means that there's almost always cars that are just going through, while the cyclists can also just cycle. And we can also look a bit at the design here as well. So you have the apron in the middle of the roundabout. That gives a little bit more flexibility to the bus that's coming around the roundabout right now. And we also have a different type of intersection here as well, or at least on the right side you have a more access road. So that's why the access to the roundabout is more narrow, while on the left side it's much more wider, because there is a more distributor road. So it's really a good combination of both types of roads in one intersection. So if you look at outside the urban areas, then you can have the higher speeds. So if you have higher speeds, you don't want to have cyclists in the priority, but you want to have them more further away from the roundabout, so cars can see them as well, but they're outside of the priority. So cars have priority here and cyclists have to give way. In this case, there is a zebra crossing on the left side, which we normally wouldn't do, but we will get into that in a moment. So these are the different flavors of roundabouts. So you have the really urban area where you can mix cyclists and cars. You have the middle ground where you separate cyclists from the cars, and you have on the other side, more outside the urban area, you have to have the vehicles in priority and cyclists have to give way. Now, if you look at capacity, I've already mentioned this. A single lane or roundabout has a capacity up to 25,000 vehicles per day. So if you think that having a roundabout really decreases your capacity, then the numbers really prove that even with a roundabout you can have the capacity that you need while still accommodating cyclists and pedestrians in the safe way that you want. So, in conclusion, why a roundabout? You have 75% reduction of serious casualties, you have better eye contact between the various modes, and you get slower speed for all users. So we have why a roundabout. Now, how do you roundabout, or the principles of roundabout design. So the first principle is to have the bicycle in one direction. So that's the safest option. You have the bicycle goes in the same direction as the car, so the car driver knows to expect a bicycle on the right side and not on the left side. I will talk to you in a minute about what you do if you have a two-directional bicycle facility, but you really want to have a one-directional bicycle facility. So if you look at priority, here the cyclist has priority because it's inside the urban area, and the pedestrian also has priority. So we always have the cyclists on the inside of the roundabout, and then on the outside we have the pedestrians, and this way it's always clear for everyone going to the roundabout that they have to give priority to every mode. So you have to first give priority to the pedestrian, then the cyclist, and then the cars, and if you exit the roundabout, it's the other way around. Then you have to have a good buffer distance. In this case, it's a tiny bit small, but you really want to have one car length, or 5 to 6 meters, to be there in between the end of the roundabout and the cyclist facility. That way, cars really turn all the way, so they are perpendicular to the cyclist track, and they can look both ways and see if there's anyone coming. Then you have to also have enough space between the roundabout and where the cyclist turns off, so you can really predict the behavior of the cyclist. So if a cyclist doesn't want to go the rest of the roundabout but wants to move forward, then it's ideal to have the space as large as possible, because then cars can really predict and can have eye contact between the cyclist and the car driver to really know what they're doing. Then you have the design and the control vehicle. So you design a roundabout for cars, but you also have the control vehicle. So you have a bus or a large truck that also has to make use of the roundabout. But you don't want to have the roundabout as large as to design it for a truck or a bus, because then you get a really big roundabout. But this way, with a rumble strip and an apron, you have enough space for them to maneuver. But for the cars, they usually stay within the asphalt ways, because that's much more smoother ride. Then you have the separation. The separation at the beginning, so the exiting and the entering lane of the roundabout. Ideally, you would separate these two, because then you also have a big overview and you can really slow down and enter and exit the roundabout at a safe speed. So if you look at sight lines, so this is an example which is good and bad. So the good thing is that you can't really see on the other side of the roundabout. So the middle part, the center of the roundabout, is covered with higher greenery. So you can see to the other side. So it's really a conflict in one direction. So you only have to look at the two side streets and you can really see only a small part of the conflicts. While on the other hand, you can see on the right side, you have a really big commercial towery thing. So that's not good, because then you can't really see any cyclists. So if there are cyclists coming the wrong way, so they are trying to maneuver the roundabout the other way around, you really can't see them. So that's why it's good and bad in this case. So a very important aspect is also to connect at a 90-degree angle. So if you don't, if you connect at a 90-degree angle, you really have to slow down. And you really have to maneuver around the roundabout, and you can't just speed through at whatever speed you're going. So if you're going 15 kilometers per hour, you really have to slow down to 30, because otherwise you will hit the greenery in the center, and you don't want that. So if you look at the priority options, so within the urban area you have on the right side, and outside of the urban area you have the cyclists outside of the priority. You can really see that the principles of these two are the same. So you have the ground markings, you have the separation between cars and cyclists, you have the raised islands, you have the apron, you have the shape of the bike lane, and you have the vehicle waiting spaces.
Hi everyone, we had a slight mishap. Evelyn was a little bit under oxygenized and a little bit overheating in the studio, so she's sitting down for a little bit, but I can cover the rest of the topic today. You'll see her hopefully back in the Q&A, and otherwise you'll have to join us for the mailbag episode later on this month or next month. So where she was at the examples of various roundabouts from around the world where things do go badly or they go really well, we'd like to take you on a little tour around to show you some of the examples of stuff going wrong, mostly. So first of all, this is an example in the Netherlands. I know that we're teaching you about Dutch design principles for roundabout design, but we don't always get it right ourselves. For example, this roundabout where you can see that there was an on-road bike lane painted in the roadway within the roundabout, and that's actually the worst of both worlds, because there's no space between vehicles and cyclists to separate them, but you're also riding right in the blind spot for trucks, for example, which means that you're at an extra danger of not being seen by a truck driver, and this will cause right hook issues with vehicles turning off the roundabout, crashing into cyclists. So don't do this, even if you can see it on Street View, it's not always good. Then another mixed roundabout right here from Delft. Delft does some great stuff in street design, but this is not their best work. As you can see, there's on-road bike lanes leading into the roundabout, but at the roundabout itself, you're left to your own devices, which is better than having a painted bike lane on the road, but that does mean that you really have to take the speed down, especially on the approaches. You can see there's no safe place for pedestrians to cross these approaches. It's fairly wide, it's asphalt, so that indicates to Dutch drivers that this is a high-speed 50 km/h area and not the 30 km/h speed that you really want in these types of locations. It's okay to mix cyclists and pedestrians or cyclists and drivers on a roundabout, but it has to be very low speed. And this is too fast, so don't do this, even if you see it on Google Street View. Then another issue that we see more and more, this is a bidirectional roundabout. Not entirely sure where this one is actually. I think it's Den Bosch, but it is. You can see on the picture on the left that there's arrows pointed in both directions, trying to indicate to drivers that the roundabout is actually traveled in both ways for cyclists. That doesn't generally generate great outcomes because people just don't expect it to happen, and you can add as much signage and paint as you want, but there will be a higher instance of crashes between cars and cyclists on a roundabout like this. There's one caveat though, that if your network really demands it, because the way the bike network is fitted around the roundabout, then it's better to design for it and add all the bells and whistles that you can to try and make it as safe as possible, than to just let it happen without any warning for drivers. So if people are going to do it anyway, there is something wrong with the bike network probably, but it's better to design for it than to ignore it and let it happen illegally. So that's a tricky one. But if you do have a system of a lot of bidirectional bikeways on your streets, this can become a real problem, especially in countries that are not used to these kind of designs. Then a nice international example from France. You can see it's a pretty high-speed roundabout. You can see the design vehicle at the bottom is a huge truck, but that also means that people in normal cars can travel through this roundabout at crazy high speeds because you barely have to do anything in terms of using your steering wheel. And if you don't have to use your steering wheel, you can hit the gas pretty hard, so that makes the roundabout, that takes away the benefits of the roundabout basically, and all you get is flow. And you can imagine the green line swooping around that corner, especially at the exit of the roundabout. The speed where the car is crossing the zebra crossing is going to be too high for safe usage. So that's a big no-no. Then, I find this one hilarious, Columbus Circle in New York. On the right-hand side, it is kind of hard to see, but this was a design done for this crazy roundabout junction system. But they put the cyclist in the middle, circulating the middle island, which to me sounds very confusing because A, how do you get on it, and B, how do you get off it? It's going to be very complicated. New York does have a tendency to put their bike lanes on the left-hand side of cars, so that might clarify why they chose this type of design, but in the end it's not going to generate the results that you want. So try and keep the cyclist on the outside of the roundabout and not on the inside. So don't do that. And then a good example from Cambridge in the UK. And they've recently, 2 months ago, I think, opened their first Dutch-style roundabout. And as you can see, it looks pretty much perfect. It's got all the trimmings, all the things, all the design elements that we talked about today. There's some, to Dutch people, funny markings, but oh well. But other than that, it's working really well so far and hasn't caused any major disruption, except a lot of attention of press and users saying how great it was. So yes, it is possible to implement bike priority roundabouts in other jurisdictions. I'm not saying it's going to be easy because it does need some understanding from drivers and a lot of communication, but it is possible to do. By the way, this was designed by a Dutch engineering firm. And then just to end it on a lighter note, please keep in mind that while designing your roundabout, roundabouts are supposed to keep things simple. If your roundabout is making things more complicated, like this This is not a render. This exists. You probably might have seen it. It's in the UK. But it is a extremely complex system of roundabouts that apparently works great, but I think it looks insanely complex. So a roundabout is supposed to make things easier and simpler and more intuitive and not make things more complicated. So make sure you keep that in mind while you're designing your roundabouts. So those are a few of the examples from overseas. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, so we'll be changing into our Q&A mode, hopefully. Yes, and we'll be answering some of your questions. Evelyn is back, she's doing fine. So we'll take 5 minutes to readjust the studio, make yourself a cup of tea, and we'll see you in 5 minutes to answer all of your questions. Hello, welcome back to the Q&A session for the Roundabouts webinar. Evelyn is back, so that's good. She's feeling much better having a cup of tea. And we got some very good questions on the Mentimeter from all of you. The first question I'd like to begin with is about the color of the asphalt. You could see in some of the images that we've shown you that the asphalt is very bright red and very dark colored. Evelyn, is it important to have bright red or brightly colored asphalt, or can you just make do with just black asphalt and some paint?
Well, in the case of priority, so if you have priority for the cyclist, it's very important to actually show that they have priority. So you do this by markings and by signs, but the color of the asphalt is very important here as well, because that signalizes that they are actually the one that's going through, while you have to stop and really have to give priority to the cyclists.
Yeah, we use that quite a bit in Dutch streets, right? The
Yes.
same principle.
Yes, in Dutch streets, like on the where you have the access road and the distributor road, you also have the red asphalt that's going through.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So as long as the same principle applies,
Yep.
so people, do you think drivers know that that's the rule, or do they just feel it?
Yeah, it's difficult to say sometimes what drivers really feel or what they look at, but I think it's a very important aspect as well, because the bright red asphalt is quite bright and also really big or noticeable, so that's a really good way to show.
Yeah. Cool. Another question, maybe a little bit more technical, about the design speed, because you talked about design speed and that you want to keep the speeds as low as possible. But for an engineer, they need a design speed to design their roundabouts. And at the exit and the entry, what would be the design speed to design these roundabouts at?
I think normally you would go for the 30 kilometers, but if you really want to have a slower speed, you can also go to the 20 kilometers per hour, but usually it's 30.
Okay.
Or at least inside the urban area. If you go outside of the urban area, it's usually a bit bigger, but...
The roundabout is bigger?
The roundabout is bigger, but also the radii are slightly bigger. It also depends, of course, on the type of vehicle.
Yeah.
Here as well.
So the roundabouts outside the urban area are more designed for trucks as well, usually, or?
Yes, usually they are.
Yeah. Okay, and that means that normal cars go faster?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then about a question that comes back quite a lot about the safety of roundabouts where bikes have priority over where they don't have priority. There was one image that we've shown where bikes have not have priority, which may actually be inside the urban area because not all Dutch cities have adapted them, right? Yeah. But how much is it safer to have bikes in priority or not? And how do we balance those needs?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky because the numbers say that in priority is slightly worse than outside of the priority. So if you have vehicles in priority, it's slightly better. But we want to also be consistent in our designs. And we also want to give a little bit of comfort to the cyclists. So that's why the Dutch national government decided with all municipalities together that it would be better for inside the urban areas to have priority for the cyclists. And that's why if all the situations are the same, so in every town that you come into, you always have priority for bikes inside the urban area, then it also makes sense, and then the numbers, the fatalities or the emergencies go down.
Right, so it's more the consistency that's important, because then people know what to expect when they... Yeah, and that's the same across all Dutch towns, or are there some cities that still...
There are still some cities that are struggling because they have already built their roundabouts with vehicles in priority, and it's slightly harder to then turn it the other way around because it needs a bit more space on the outsides to actually curve the cycleways to have them perfectly circular around the roundabout. So there are some municipalities that still struggle with that.
Because they made a different choice at the beginning, and now they have to retrofit, right?
No.
Right. There's a question about the cost. I know that the Cambridge one cost £2.5 million or £3 million. How much is a roundabout in the Netherlands more expensive than traffic lights, or is it cheaper? Do you know?
I don't really know. It really depends on what situation you had before. So if you already have an intersection that only has like two lanes or one lane on each direction, then it wouldn't really matter the cost of a roundabout or a larger intersection where you have traffic lights. But if you already have a large intersection, then it would cost more to make it a roundabout because you have to really switch out the entire intersection.
Right. And does that mean that they need buy more land or take more space, or is the footprint, is it very different, the footprint from a protected intersection?
No, if you build a good protected intersection, then the amount of space really doesn't matter. Okay. But if you want to cut corners and make an intersection that works okay, then a roundabout would take more space. Would take more space, right. There was another question. Oh yeah, is there because you said the bike lane around the roundabout needs to be perfectly circular. Yep. Is there also examples where they're not symmetrical, where you maybe only have bike lanes on one side or not the whole way around? And is that safe? Can we do that? It is safe, but it really depends on the crossings of the cycleway. So if every crossing is one way, but you have one two-way because you already have a bidirectional cycle path because of the network, then that's a point that's slightly more unsafe than the one-directional crossing. So it really depends on the network as well. Yeah.
And speaking of safety, we say at grade, all these roundabouts that we've shown have at grade crossings, so sort of level you always meet. But there's also a lot of bigger roundabouts that have great separation, right, where they have a tunnel or a bridge. The Hovenring in Eindhoven is a famous bicycle roundabout. But is there a specific level where we need to separate them, or is it a matter of how many cars travel there a day, or is it what's the threshold for when you have to separate them?
The threshold really is about the number of lanes. So a single lane roundabout can go up to 25,000 vehicles per day. But if you want to have a higher level of service or more cars, then you need more lanes, technically. So if you have 2 lanes, then you have a chance of one car blocking the other and you can't see the cyclist. So that's the point where you grade separate. Right.
So the number of cars is less important than the number of lanes.
Yes.
Because of the crossing distance.
Yep.
Yeah. And even when they're out of priority, it's still...
Yeah, even out of priority, you wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Fair enough. And is there... there's another question about slowing down vehicles outside the urban area, because if you have a roundabout there, you still have crossing points. Do we still try and slow people down as they approach those, and what kind of techniques would we use?
I think in most cases we slow people down by narrowing the lane, and also at a roundabout you really, especially when it's outside of the urban area and you have cyclists not in priority, then you really want to separate the vehicles going in and going out. So that's why you also have a bit of a swerve at the beginning of the roundabout, so that also takes down the speed a bit.
So there's no speed bumps generally?
Generally, no, because also speed bumps signalize that you have to give way, or at least in most cases you have to give priority to the other road user, so that could be confusing for the car driver. Mixed messages. Yes.
We don't like mixed messages.
No.
Is there a question about how many legs can you have? Because we've only shown 4. Mm-hmm. Well, most of them are four legs. Can you have 5 or 6 or 7? What's the maximum?
It really depends on the configuration. So you can maybe have 4 but on one side, but you really want to connect them at a 90-degree angle. So depending on how much room you have in between, I wouldn't recommend 2 streets going ahead, like really meeting at the center point, because that also makes it very easy to speed.
Right. So then, if they all have to meet at 90 degrees, the more legs, the bigger the roundabout?
Oh,
more or
no.
less? No, I don't know. Good point.
I think I've only seen 5-way roundabouts, not 6-way.
6 is too many.
6 is too many.
Here's a couple of questions about people with sight impairments. Do you know of any? Do they have any trouble navigating a roundabout in the Netherlands? Or is there special considerations that we take into account when designing them?
I think we have the markings, or at least the textured tiles that help. And the difficulty with a roundabout is, of course, that you don't have lights, so you really have to get priority here. So that makes it more difficult for people with sight impairments. But with the technical or the tactical tiles, it helps a bit. But I think it's not the most safe option for them. But for the speed difference, I think it is. So if you really have a distributor road, then it's the best option for them. Right.
And because they have full priority, right?
Yep.
So they...
Yeah. And I think if you have a roundabout where you know that there are going to be a lot of people with disabilities, then if you, or also for safety, it's also better to raise the crossings. And that's also a means that they can travel on one platform instead of going up and down and up and down.
Right.
That's also
a flush,
more dangerous.
A flush crossing.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you talked about the rumble strips and the aprons on the inside, and generally our Dutch roundabouts, are they flat or are they leveled, cambered, sorry. So do they sit higher, like a more domey style, and then is the rumble strip in the middle even higher, or is it pretty flat?
I think it's slightly like a dome, but that's mostly because of water. So if you have rain, which we have a lot in the Netherlands, then it's slightly easier. At least you want the water to be at the end of the roundabout and not on the entire surface. So I think they taper it a bit. Yeah. And then the rumble strips are more tapered.
More tapered, right. So a truck would level out a little bit. More level.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But that's also to slow them down.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the truck driver would...
Straight ahead.
Yeah.
Here's a question about capacity, because you talked about the normal roundabout, 25,000. Are there any other solutions for if you have more than 25,000 cars and you still want a roundabout? What other options do we have?
So we have a turbo roundabout. So that's really big then in this case. You also have 2-lane roundabouts, but I'm not really a big fan, or at least as a driver, if I drive a car myself, I don't really like them. And the difference in capacity is only 10 to 20% extra. So if you have 1 lane on the roundabout extra, it's not really that much of a capacity
gain.
Gain. And then if you have a turbo roundabout or a roundabout that has 2 legs going in and going out, then you have significantly more capacity. But then for cyclists, it gets tricky, because then you can't really have priority, or you really want to grade separate. So it's better to really look at your network again and see if there's maybe another space where a car can go.
Yeah, right. Not put them all in that one. And maybe it's not a good place for a roundabout. That's also possible, right?
That's also possible. And maybe then you choose to have traffic lights there.
Yeah. Then there's a couple of more questions. Is there an advantage to having a roundabout for a person on a bike? Like, what's their key advantage? Because they're safer for cars, and we've talked about that quite a lot. But what about bikes?
Well, they are safer for bikes because of the lower speed here as well. And you have the priority, so that means that you can actually cycle through instead of waiting for a traffic light. And if you don't have traffic lights for cyclists in some countries, they don't have that yet. So then you really have to wait a long time for all the other traffic to continue, and then you can finally cross.
Right. Right. So yeah, the full priority gives you a smooth, continuous way. Yeah. People that have been on study tours, I think, will have realized that actually a roundabout's quite fun to ride because everybody has to stop for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice. There was one. As a clarification, the 25,000, is that the total number of vehicles, or is it 25,000 per?
The total number.
The total number that travels on all four legs combined. Yeah, that's a good. There's one, somebody who actually posted the link to a roundabout, which we probably don't have time to get into today. One more question about the land, land issue. Does it take more space? Because if you look at it, it looks like it takes more space. But why does it not take more space than a well-built protected intersection? What's the difference? Like, where do you gain so much space?
Well, for the protected intersection, if you want to make it right, you also have the 5 meter distance on all sides. So between the car lane and the cycle path. So you have the same with a roundabout, and with a roundabout you only have one lane, while for a traffic light situation or intersection with the same capacity, you have maybe 2 entry lanes and 2 exit lanes. So that's why for land use it's mostly the same.
Right. So even though you have the same number of cars, you only need one lane for the approach, and that's because it's
continuous flow.
Right. So you don't have to stop and wait.
Yeah. You don't have to stop and wait, and normally you have 30 seconds for all cars going straight ahead, and now you can just have all the time, or if you want to go straight ahead, then you can just go.
There's no optimization needed.
No.
Yeah.
You optimize it yourself.
Nice. Well, thank you very much. Those were some of the key questions of today. If you still have questions that you want to ask, please keep sending them in either through the Mentimeter or in the YouTube chat. We will be organizing a mailbag webinar where we will discuss more of the questions. For today, we have one more question about what the next webinar should be about, and you can see it on the screen right now. You have already voted in large numbers, and I see that most people want a webinar on network planning. All right. Your wish is our command. So we will be looking at that, but I think we can make that work somehow. But speaking of next webinars, we also have something very exciting. The first time you'll hear about it on this channel, and that's that we're working on the Mobicon Academy, for which we have a little introduction movie. And with that, we're going to be letting you go tonight. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you learned a lot about roundabouts. And we hope to see you in the Mobicon Academy from next month. Have a good night. Hello, everybody, for the real start of the episode. Welcome to the last webinar on the Mobicon Academy series for 2020. Today we're going to talk about roundabouts, again, my favorite topic. To talk about roundabouts with us is Eveline de Jong, my colleague who ran the roundabouts webinar last time, if you've seen that. We had so many questions come in, and there's so much to explore in terms of roundabouts that we thought it would be a good idea to dedicate a whole episode to roundabouts for you today. So today we have 10 questions, the 10 biggest questions probably that came in through the last webinar and through the email that we're going to discuss. And then if we have time, we're going to show you some good and bad examples of roundabouts in the Netherlands that we think illustrate some valid points about roundabout design and how far you can stretch the design, because some are honestly quite hilarious. So with that being said, we hope you enjoyed the episode. There's not a break in the middle, so we'll just keep going. It's probably going to run for about 45 minutes. If you have any questions along the way, additional questions, you can leave them in the comment section on YouTube, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So with that, I think we can start with the first question that came in through the email, and that is a question we get quite regularly. How do we make roundabouts safe for people with sight impairments? Blind people or people with not perfect sight, can they navigate these roundabouts? And if so, how do they do it and how can we design them to be safe for them? Eveline, hello,
yes.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We see this question come up quite regularly in all types of design from the Netherlands, but with roundabouts in particular, is there any insight you have on that?
Well, with a roundabout, you do have a larger footprint that you have to navigate, but we do design them in this way that it's a really good flow to walk around them. So it feels natural to walk around the roundabout, and we do have textiles or textured on the ground, and we also teach how to get around a roundabout in courses, so they know what to expect when there's a roundabout. So
right.
That's also one of the points to make it easier to navigate it, but also with how the footpaths attach to the roundabout, so that you don't have to walk all the way around it, but that it feels natural.
Right. So the what's important is what you're saying is the approach towards the roundabout, that it's not a 90-degree zigzag,
No.
but you just continue your footpath along the way. And is there any ways to make it safer or more comfortable for people with sight impairments?
If you raise the platforms where they cross, so the zebra crossings, if you have that raised on a platform, so you don't have a height difference between the walkway and where you just are walking on the footpath, that's also easier to navigate it.
Yeah.
It's important if you do that there's some textile on the pavement that says that you are about to cross, because otherwise you wouldn't know, but it makes it easier with less steps.
Right. So it's a step-free, you don't have curbs to cross that might be trip hazards or, And because it's a priority, because you have a good roundabout has a pedestrian priority, do you think that's better for people with sight impairments or easier to cross?
I think so, or at least when they know that they can safely cross. If they have priority, then if all the roundabouts in the municipality are also designed that way, that's also why it's important to have the same standard. And that's obviously is difficult for if you're just starting to build these, right? The first one's going to be very different. So that might require some more training for people with sight impairments, or the Foundation of the Blind, or somebody to give people some training. And what about the speed at the roundabout? Because I can imagine it's a different design speed here. Does that have implications for people with impairments? Well, we design roundabouts to slow people down, so that's also why you have a bump. If you have the priority, if you have a bump there, then it also slows vehicles down. So that helps with. It's always better to have slower cars than faster driving cars. Regardless of your physical. If you can see or not see.
And also for wheelchair users, right? Same thing. So speed is critical.
And also good sight lines, so that the vehicles can actually see you crossing.
Right.
That's also important. Also that they can see that you maybe have some disability or some impairment. That also helps, because then they can adjust their speed and slow down and know when you are done crossing.
So you also rely a little bit on the politeness or the driver actually following the rules properly, but that's the same with any design, I guess, right? Yeah. Okay, I hope that answered the question of whoever sent that one in. I think we can go to the second question, which is probably a little bit technical one, but what's the level of traffic that you can, we see it on the screen. What level of traffic is safe for an at-grade crossing for pedestrians? Like how many cars can you have, or is there a guideline or a rule that you follow?
We do have a number of cars, but that's more dependent on the design of the roundabout. So for pedestrian crossings, you actually only want to cross one lane. Or if you have two lanes that you want to cross, it's only at the entry point and not the exit point, because at the exit point, most of the time the speed is higher than on the entry point.
Right. So we've got a slide that shows 3 types of roundabout.
Yep.
So the first one on the left,
Yep.
Can you speak to that one?
Yeah, so that's the one-lane roundabout. So that's the most typical roundabout in urban areas, at least. So you have one entry lane, one exit lane. So you only have to cross about 4 meters. So that's a normal crossing distance for people to cross. So an at-grade crossing is possible there. Then the middle one, the turbo roundabout with 2 entry lanes and 1 exit lane, you can do an at-grade crossing. It is possible. I don't know if I would recommend it, or you can do it, but it's not the most safe option. Right. But it is possible.
It is, but then you wouldn't put a zebra crossing there, would you?
No.
No.
No, well, it depends on if you have cycle priority. Because if you have cycle priority, you also have priority for the pedestrians. But
right.
I think in most cases, this type of roundabout is outside of the urban area. Yeah. And there aren't any pedestrians or such a low level, so there isn't any crossing.
Right. And then the third one on the right?
Yeah, so don't do an at-grade crossing at that one.
Solid advice.
Yeah, because at the exit lane, if you have one vehicle, they can stop the side for the other vehicle, and then you can get hit by a car. Yeah.
So if one car stops to be nice to a pedestrian,
and the other car doesn't,
and the other one because they maybe don't have to, or because they're not expecting.
Yeah, they don't see anyone standing there.
And there's no safe place to wait. No. One lane at a time. So then it's,
so you think you can cross, you think them the first person nicely, and then.
So actually, it's quite easy. It's just one lane is good, 2 lanes is bad. Yeah. But maybe you can get away with 2 lanes.
Yeah, with an entry point. If you can have it any other way, then If you have the opportunity, take it and don't put it there. Yeah. Right. And I think that's a good realization that there's no black or white in safety, right? These guidelines, they say it's recommended this way. It gets progressively worse when you start adding lanes, and that's just simple. But there's not a real turning point where they say you're not allowed to do this. They just say it's not recommended, but think for yourself. Yeah. Well, at the 2 lanes, 2 exit lanes,
that's a no.
That's a real no.
Yeah, that's quite interesting that we think differently about entry lanes and exit lanes, right? Because I think a lot of people see a roundabout and they just say, oh, there's 2 lanes in and 2 lanes out. Yeah. But they actually have quite different characteristics. Because how do we see them? Like what's the difference as you approach a roundabout? You think differently, or you?
Well, as you approach the roundabout, you enter slowly because you know that you have to give way. You have to give priority, even if there is no cycle path or anything. Right. You always have to give priority to the one coming from your left. So that's why you slow down. Yeah. And at the entry point, you know you have priority, or at least
at the exit.
At the exit, if the other person is actually following the rules, of course, but then you have priority. So we do know that people speed up when they drive around the roundabout. Right. And you also see it in the turning radii used in the design. So the turning radii for entering is 12 meters. Yeah. And exiting is 20. Right,
so we already anticipate that they're going to do that, and we actually design for it. That's maybe not such a good idea. Maybe we found a little flaw in the system. Interesting. So I think that's a really good lesson for the viewers at home. Think differently about your entry design as your exit design, because they are the traffic psychology is just very different, and that has implications on the safety for people crossing that. It's kind of common sense. Like, it makes sense when you say it, but you never think about it that way. Very good. All right. The third question, buses. Because buses can't take roundabouts, can they? How would you do that? You can't do that. But the actual question is, do roundabouts need to be wider if there is a lot of bus traffic? Do you design them differently at all?
I don't think we design them differently if is there one bus or a lot of buses. Right. We usually design them on the highest or the biggest vehicle that there is.
Yeah.
So that's a bus most of the cases.
Usually.
Usually. And we do have aprons or that sort of thing if there are...
We have a slide here that shows, it's a pretty famous video by now. If you've seen the previous webinar, you've seen this video come along, but this is a bus navigating the roundabout and some cyclists riding on the footpath, but that's okay. Yeah, so what do we see here? We see the bus going around, and it doesn't even really touch the apron, does it?
No, just with one tire.
Yeah.
But
right
a roundabout is usually also designed, the lane of a roundabout is around 5 meters or something. So while a normal car lane is like 3 meters. So that's also just the normal design of a roundabout is actually quite large.
Yeah, and good enough for a bus.
Yeah, good enough for a bus. And
you wouldn't design it differently if there's 10 or 20 buses an hour or 50?
No.
No, because it's still, if it fits one, it will fit, right?
Because if you make a roundabout even wider, then most of the time the speed also goes up.
Right, the speed of the normal cars as well. Right.
Of the normal cars, but also for the buses, because if they know that it's not a really tight roundabout, then they can also speed through. And then the whole purpose of the roundabout is lost.
Yeah, because buses are also dangerous if they go fast.
It's more mass than a car.
We see a bus stuck in traffic now on the slide, but let's not go there. Right, so that's a good thing to remember as well, like volume and design vehicle of the volume is not necessarily correlated. You have a design vehicle that you use, and that will work for however many of those design vehicles you need.
Yeah, right. The design vehicle and the speed.
Yeah. And then we saw that video with the apron for so the bus just touched it a little bit because it did a 3/4 turn. So that tells you it's a different design vehicle, or because it was quite a big apron, right? Yeah.
I think they used an even larger vehicle as the design vehicle for at least the aprons.
Yeah. And that means that the bus can go around quite comfortably and doesn't even get the jolt or the discomfort for passengers that we sometimes hear about. Can't do that for a bus because the poor passengers are going to be rattling in their seats. You don't want that. Right, so you just make sure that you have a good design vehicle, and then maybe a second control vehicle, which could be a bus, and then make sure that for a normal passenger car, it doesn't go too fast. And you have to find the balance between those three. That makes sense. No, makes sense, doesn't it? Right. Then we have the fourth question, which is a slightly even more technical question. What about the camber? Now we'll explain that in a little bit. But do Dutch roundabouts have an inner camber, or are they flat? And the camber is basically the elevation, or how wide or how high or what angle the road is laid at, basically. You can imagine water that falls onto the road needs to flow into a certain direction to get to the drainage pit, especially in the Netherlands, given we're below sea level. Every single drop that falls from the sky needs to be caught somewhere and pumped back out. And then in the Netherlands, do we have flat roundabouts, or are they a little bit higher in the middle? How do we design? It's quite technical. If you don't find it interesting, just skip to the next 2 minutes. But
so we do have a camber of a couple of percent for the rain. And usually the center part is higher than the
right. We have a little slide that shows you the cross section. Maybe you can explain what we're looking at, because also the photo on the top left is quite interesting. But at the bottom you see the camber, right?
Yeah. So at the bottom is the camber of the road. So that's about
the black thing is the road.
The black thing is the road. So that's 2.5%. So that's come through also for cars. They really rarely notice the difference in height. And then for the middle part, so for the apron, that's higher, and that only has a 1%. And they only have that at 1% because if it's higher or a higher gradient, then the trucks can tip over.
Right.
Don't want that.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a bad idea.
No.
Right, so it's more flat. The actual rumble strip or the apron is more flat than the roadway, the circulatory roadway. But then there's a bit in the middle. Oops, sorry. That is the end of the apron. And there's a lip of 2 to 3 centimeters. And that's to stop cars from driving on it, or just?
Yeah, I think it's to stop cars from wanting to
Right.
to make it even.
Yeah, make it fun.
Yeah, make it more fun.
Right, and that's just 1 inch, 1.5 inch, the difference between the roadway and the.
Yeah, and also for larger vehicles to also slow them down.
Yeah. And a lot of these elements are prefabricated, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it says rotonde block. Then the block thing is prefabricated, and then the apron can be prefabricated.
Mm-hmm.
They also have the whole element as a whole.
Yeah.
And then they only have to make the asphalt, so the black bit.
Yeah.
But
they pour that in place.
Yeah, they pour that in place, and then they can also put the other things just.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite easy.
It's very efficient.
Yeah.
There's some good time-lapse videos on YouTube of people building roundabouts, if you're really interested. You have some time over the holidays.
Yeah.
And then what do we see in the top left? Because it looks like a truck parked on a roundabout, but is that the case?
Yeah, when I first saw the photo, I also thought it was parked. But if you look really closely, you can see that the end of the truck is actually at the beginning of the entryway. So because it's such a large truck, so an articulated truck, it has to move around the entire apron, because otherwise it can't take the turn. Yeah. So the design or the control vehicle may be too small for this roundabout.
Or it's a very large truck.
Or a very large truck.
But you can also see that they have the apron on the inside, right? On the left-hand side, like an apron for the truck turning into the... So it's a double apron roundabout. Yep. Right. Yeah,
they usually only make the apron on the exit.
Yeah.
And not on the entry.
Right.
Or less usual.
Yeah,
but in this case, maybe they knew that there were some very large trucks using this roundabout.
If it's a heavy industrial area or something, you can choose to add more apron to allow for the trucks. Yep. But you can imagine this truck is not going to go very fast. It can get through, but barely.
It can get through, but
right.
Maybe at 10 kilometers per hour or something.
Which is fine.
Yeah. It can move.
Yeah, exactly. It can get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Then if we go on to the next question, which is already question number 5, if you have an asymmetric flow, how does that function, or how does that work in terms of the design of a roundabout? So if you're going to, I'll just explain asymmetric flow. If you have 4 legs into the roundabout, ideally, or if you want to make it work most optimally, get to the 25,000 or 28,000 vehicles capacity, it's best if all flows are about the same. So you have 6,000 cars from the left, 6,000 cars from the right, and other way, up and down. But can you do a roundabout when it's not equal, or do you run into problems?
No, you can do that. That's always possible, but you really have to take into account what kind of roundabout you're making. So for just 1 lane roundabout, you can run into the problem that you can't enter the roundabout, or you have difficulty entering the roundabout because you always have to wait because there's a lot of traffic coming around.
Because that starts the flow from on the main trunk route, and then you try and squeeze in. But if that flow is super heavy, then you never find a spot.
Well, it's most difficult, I think, with 2-lane roundabouts, because then if you have a 2-lane roundabout, which we never really have in the Netherlands, but you have a lot of the time in France, for example, then you don't know where anyone is going, so that's even more difficult to think when can I enter. So then you really have to wait a long time. So I think with the single lane, it is sometimes more difficult, but it's not impossible. And then with a turbo roundabout, you do know where everyone is going, so that makes it a bit easier. And then you just have, for the leg that has less traffic, you would just have less lanes. So maybe you only have 1 entry, 1 exit. For another, you have 2 entry and 1 exit.
Maybe we can find an example in a minute, but right. So that's another example or another advantage of the turbo roundabout, because it's more predictable about where people are going. So you know, I only have to give way to people in that lane and not in that lane. While otherwise they might be. I hadn't thought of that yet.
Yeah.
So then, do we often see roundabouts at like busy driveway exits or something? Or is it relatively uncommon?
Well, you usually do a roundabout when you have two equal flows.
So it's preferred,
Yeah.
and otherwise you just have a giveaway
Yeah.
sign, right?
But I think in some cases there are even roundabouts that have an exit construction. So you have just 3 normal lanes and then one just someone with a farm or something that just lands on the roundabout. So apparently that's also a possibility. It works.
And they just, it works the same, right? They also have to give way to
you also have to
everybody.
Give way, so that's also a possibility. And maybe some of the times you have to wait. But I think with roundabouts there's less frustration. So with a traffic light, you may be thinking, I had to wait for the last traffic light. I had to wait 2 minutes, and now I just run this orange light because I don't want to wait another time. While at a roundabout, you just see that there's also a lot of traffic, so you don't want to squeeze in.
Right. So instead of having to wait for the stupid machine to give you green time, you actually are looking at other vehicles and finding the gap there. So it's more relying on yourself and your how you perceive the rest of the world. That's quite interesting.
And sometimes it's even so that maybe someone's coming from your left side and they do have priority, but they know that you've been waiting a long time. So they just don't enter the roundabout, so you can negotiate.
Yes, because if they hold back for another second, you can squeeze in first. And you can't do that with a traffic light.
No.
Roundabouts, more social. So many advantages to roundabouts. Who doesn't love a good roundabout? Nice. So short answer is yes, it's possible. But you might, depending on how asymmetrical, again, it's not black or white, but the more asymmetrical it gets, the longer the expected wait is for the people on the small leg.
If you have like 800 against 2 or something, then it's nearly impossible. Maybe then it's better to see if you can connect at another point.
Oh, right, just make the entryway into a side street. More side street configuration and straight onto the roundabout. Or further upstream or something. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. A little bit related, question number 6. What about like a lopsided roundabout? Is there any examples of an asymmetric roundabout that has a cycleway on one side but maybe not on the other? Short answer, I think, is yes. Do you have an example?
Yes.
We have a beautiful example right here on the screen. There you go. Look at that beauty. Isn't it gorgeous? I forgot which city it's in. Amersfoort?
No, I don't think this one is.
No, it's not Amersfoort. We'll find the link. Put it in the show notes.
So you can see it is possible, but when you do have a lopsided one or one-sided bicycle path, it usually means that you have a two-way bicycle path, or at least in most cases, because otherwise the cyclist can't go around. So you do have to pay extra attention to how you design the crossing. So with the red, with the, I think there are arrows on it as well, and it's also raised, and all these things make it extra, make it stand out. And if you do have a two-way cycle path, just make sure that there are both also two-way bicycle paths.
Right.
Because if you enter on the leg that only has a one-way, and you exit it, and you don't expect it to be a two-way, then it can have disastrous results.
Right. So the more signage and paint and speed tables and stuff you see, the riskier it probably was. So it's a good tip for Google Maps people if you're really interested in seeing how it works. The more signage, it's probably not necessarily a good idea. Try and avoid it, but if you do need to, then make sure they have bidirectional on all sides, not just partial. Bidirectional, right, yes, because Okay, I get you now. If you enter on a side that has a single lane, you're
Yep.
looking to the left, you're like, oh, no bikes there.
Yeah.
You just keep looking in the same place,
Yep.
and then there's...
Then you exit it, and then there's a bike coming from the right.
I think we do have an example of one
Yep.
of those later, because they do get built.
Yep, they do get built, but
Not everything on Google Maps is perfect.
no.
Right.
In some cases, you even see that cyclists just use the one where there's only a one-way bicycle path. They just use it in both ways because they already had a two-way on the other leg as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah, and
they just want to
used to it.
continue and
Yeah.
be on their way.
And would you have kept the design, if we can go back to the slide, would you have kept it, would you have designed it in this way, or what could you have done to make it a little bit better? Is there any other way to do this, or is it just, well, that's just a network and you got to make the most of it?
Yeah, I think in this case the network already had two-way bicycle paths. I
Yeah,
don't know
looks like
why there's also a two-way bicycle path going to the lower left corner, because otherwise you
Yeah.
only had to cross at the roundabout once.
Yeah.
But I don't know where this is or what's
No,
in
it
the
needs a bit
neighborhood.
more network analysis to see
But
what's going on.
I think in all cases you really want to have just a one-way bicycle path. That's
Yeah.
always the safest,
Yeah.
unless you just have functions or something on one side.
Yeah.
Then it
Water
makes sense.
or...
If you have water on the other side and nothing on it,
Mm.
and on the other side you have a school,
Yeah.
you don't want people to cross.
No, just to get to
Yeah.
the bike path. Yeah. So that's also quite a useful tip probably if you're starting to build bike lanes more in the Dutch style.
Yep.
And you want to give them priority. Don't start with
No.
bidirectionals. They
I
might
wouldn't
come in.
recommend it.
No, that would be less safe.
Yeah.
Well, that's good that we saw Cambridge, right? They did a one direction. That seems to be going well. Good,
Yep.
good. Then another, well, we don't know if it's a myth yet, but another strongly, it keeps popping up. Do roundabouts need more land? Is question number 7. Do they need more land to fit into the same footprint, or can we actually do a conversion? What do you have to say to people that say, oh, it doesn't fit a roundabout because it's too big?
Well, it depends on the roundabout. So
Always good answer.
yeah. So if you have a small roundabout, then it's smaller.
Yeah.
Makes sense. While usually when you have already a big intersection, you already have 2 entry and 2 exit lanes on all sides, then the intersection is already quite big. So then the difference isn't that great.
Right.
So if you have an urban area where there's slow traffic or low traffic volumes, you maybe can do with a roundabout without any traffic facilities, cycle facilities, because you can just mix the traffic. Then it's a really, really small roundabout, so it hardly takes up any more space.
And that would still be safer?
Yes.
Yes. That's good to know. We also have an example on the slide from the beautiful town of Ridderkerk, south of Rotterdam. I think we have used this before. So this is the before situation.
Yeah, so 2 entry, 2 exits, or 3.
3 on the south
4
even.
on the...
Yeah, 4 with a
I
bus
think
lane.
a bus lane, yeah.
And they have rebuilt into this. You can see the building top left. So that's, well, maybe a slightly larger footprint, but it's not much.
Well, with the
right?
cycle paths, I think.
Yeah, no, not if you include the cycle
No.
paths.
With the cycle paths, the roundabout is smaller.
Yeah, so that it can fit into the same footprint. What probably happened here is that the intersection, the signalized intersection, might have been overbuilt a little bit. It was a little bit bigger than they actually needed. So maybe the traffic model predicted a volume that they never got to, which meant that they could revert back to a roundabout, because it does have less capacity, right? This configuration would have less capacity than the previous one. Right. So then they were like, well, we can make it safer by just reverting it back. And it looks like it fit into the same footprint. So yes, maybe you have less space for approach lanes, right? Because you can get away with only one often. But you do have more space because you go in a circular fashion.
Yeah, and maybe there's a lot of cycle traffic or bicycle traffic
Right.
on this part.
Probably.
And
Yes.
that also mostly means in a traffic light situation that you have a lot more lanes, approach lanes, because you want to have every second counts, so you
yes.
want to separate them as most. So maybe that's why it's also was big, and now you can do it a lot smaller.
Right. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because you mean if we look at this,
Yeah.
if you have high bicycle volume,
Yeah.
that reduces the car volume,
Yes.
and it increases the space.
Yeah, because in this case, maybe you have like a couple of vehicles turning left, but if you turn left, then the whole intersection is down.
Yeah.
Because you can only turn left, or at least the other one can also turn left from the other side, but you can't do anything more. While when a car just turns right, you only have to have a couple of seconds because you enter and exit quite fast.
Right.
While if you turn left, you have to have a larger.
Yeah. So while this may look like a very high capacity intersection,
Yeah.
maybe because if the traffic volume for bikes increases,
Yeah.
the total capacity goes down
Yeah.
to a point where a roundabout might be more efficient.
Yep.
Aha, look at that. I learned something today as well. Which this indicates quite nicely, because if you can
Yep.
imagine a car turning left here, for 90% of the time, all the other traffic can still go as well.
Yep.
It's only at the crossing points or where the other cars need to hold back a little bit for the car to go. Then you have to stop or limit the capacity, but otherwise it's continuous.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And the interesting in this one is also that it has a two-directional cycle path on the north side.
Yeah.
And it does connect very nicely to the other sides as well, because the other sides don't have a two-way. So that's also means it's less tempting to cycle the wrong way.
Right. Because otherwise you have to go the whole way against the traffic instead of just one bit.
Yep.
And because you're in full priority
Yep.
as a bike, it doesn't actually take that much more time.
No.
Right?
No, and you can see where they attached the cycle lane. If they would have attached it a bit more to the right, then it would have been in direct contact with the south one, and then that wouldn't.
No, then it's too
That
tempting
would
to
work,
go
yeah.
against the traffic. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it doesn't have a two-way on the south side as well, so that's also
Yeah.
makes it less tempting to.
Yeah. So that's
go
the
the
lesson:
other
is
way
if you do have a bidirectional path,
Yeah.
a roundabout, if you want to attempt a roundabout with bike priority, it's actually a really good spot to transition
Yep.
to unidirectional paths if that's the next
Yep.
phase of your project. So if you're in a new city, you often start, or you're new into the cycling business, you often start with bidirectional paths
Yep.
because they're easy to build, and less reduction in car parks or whatever.
Yeah, that takes up less space.
Yeah.
Because you then maybe have 3 meters instead of 2 times 2 meters.
Right,
so
right.
1
Yeah.
meter.
And only one buffer.
Yep.
Yeah. So those are all advantages, but then at some point you're going to be like, okay, we're not going to extend the whole network in bidirectionals.
Yep.
Then maybe a roundabout is perfect.
Yep.
That's good strategy. And it could help that if it does get very popular, that your traffic lights reduce in volume to a point where the roundabout becomes competitive again.
Yep.
And it fits.
And it fits.
Usually.
Usually. Yeah. Sometimes we do have to have a little trick
Yeah.
to make it
Work.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'll get to a slide where it probably wouldn't fit in a second as well. There's obviously tons of examples where it obviously wouldn't fit, and then
Yeah.
you can look at reducing car capacity, or maybe a traffic light is the best solution. I mean, there's
Yeah, in some case it can be.
yeah, and there's hundreds of traffic lights in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a country full of roundabouts, but they do have their advantages.
That's France.
That's France. Yeah. We'll get to France as well. Oh, shall we do France? Oh, no. Oh, this is actually no. We'll go to the next question before we get sidetracked by funny roundabouts from overseas. The bicycle priority question. Now we've talked about this. This is a difficult question because it's actually not as much of a technical question anymore. It's more a question of policy. right? There's been a lot of research there's actually not been that much research. There was a lot of research in the 90s about the safety of roundabouts and if they're safer or not safer when you have bikes in priority versus bikes that give way to cars. The conclusion of that research was that it's much safer to have bikes give way to cars, because it makes sense, because if a bike stops and looks before they go, you're forcing them to take responsibility for their own safety, more so than that you're putting the responsibility back on the driver. And that story, you need to have cars have priority because otherwise bikes get hit. That is still in a lot of cities, even in a lot of municipalities in the Netherlands, it's still a popular consideration. But if you think about it, that every day we have trade-offs of safety versus convenience and safety versus accessibility and safety versus delay all the time. That's just commonplace. And what I think is important is, because there's been recent research that compared them, and they did show that bike roundabouts or municipalities that have all the bikes in priority within their urban area do show a higher number of crashes on the roundabouts themselves. They didn't check for vehicle intensities and bike intensities, because you could also argue that the more convenient and attractive you make it to ride your bike, the more people you get riding their bikes, thus the more risk the roundabout has, and that's just a fact of numbers. But it's at the same time, that figure needs to be put in perspective, because it is still significantly safer than a traffic light by a factor of 3, even in a roundabout that has priority for cyclists. So it is important to put that into perspective. Yes, it might be less safe than making bikes stop and give way to all the cars. It's still significantly safer than a traffic light where you make the bikes stop anyway. And on the flip side, you are gaining a lot in terms of accessibility, in terms of speed, in terms of reduction in delay, and that's also an important consideration. Safety is important, but it's not the only consideration in the traffic engineering world, because if that was the case, we would have banned cars outright about 60 years ago. So you can't argue that safety is the one and only argument. You have to find a balance, and it is risky, especially if you're going to be building the first one in an environment where they're not commonplace. And I would recommend building one in a place that's maybe not super busy, and maybe you find a place where you do have all the space, so you don't need to compromise on the design. And results will tell how it's going in Cambridge, but so far it seems to be going very well. So you can implement these things safely in a new environment if you take care in the design. So that was the statement on safety. Anything you want to add?
Well, I think also they didn't take into account if the roundabout was well designed. So
right.
If all the guidelines were followed, if there was enough space between the car and the cycle lane. So.
Yeah, it was a huge study, right? They compared all of the roundabouts in the Netherlands, which is hundreds. Was it? 800? Thousands.
2,000 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Which is good on them, but it would have been very useful if they had controlled for intensities and design quality, because there is a lot of poorly designed roundabouts. Even
I think they looked into 90 more closely. So.
Right.
And then they checked if the different design elements were had any effect on...
In a sample.
Yeah,
right.
In a sample.
So, short story, needs more research.
Yes.
Potentially more dangerous, but not necessarily a showstopper. If there's any more questions, please send them our way. Then I thought the last question was actually quite funny. Is there any examples, and we had to look really hard, is there any examples of roundabouts in the Netherlands where the pedestrians have to walk, or that allow pedestrians to walk through the center of the roundabout? I had to think really hard. Did you find any?
No, or at least, well, I haven't seen all the roundabouts in the Netherlands.
2,000 apparently.
Yeah, 2,000 apparently, but no, I couldn't find any one example that had
We
that.
did find one in the USA.
Yeah.
We have a little video of it. It will pop up on the screen. I find this quite hilarious. This is, well, Yeah, you could call it a roundabout.
Yeah.
You could call it, I don't even know, a mess,
Yeah.
a hot mess. So what we're looking at here is that you can see the ladders leading into the island in the middle, then a sea of asphalt around it. And you can imagine, these are big cars, they're not even steering at all, and they can just go wherever they want. It is...
Yeah. But the width of the lane on the roundabouts
It's insane.
about 7 meters or something like
It's
that?
huge.
Maybe 8?
No, more, I think. If you look at, well, there on the widest part, there's one car. I think it's about 10 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Don't do this.
I wouldn't want to cross on it.
There's a nice park in the middle.
Yeah, there's
You
a
can
nice
sit
park in the
and
middle.
play with your dog.
Well, and they place some rocks on it, so you can't drive straight through.
It's amazing. All ticks all the boxes.
Yeah.
You do wonder what the design vehicle was for this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a space shuttle or an airplane. Anyway.
UFO.
No, we do not have this in the Netherlands, and we would not recommend building something like this because it's unnecessary crossings. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. There is if anybody's been to Velocity in Nijmegen 2 years ago, they have the famous Keizer Karelplein, which is what looks like a roundabout, but is actually not a roundabout. And they have a little park in the middle with actual benches, except there's no way to get to it because it's 6 lanes. It's like the Arc de Triomphe, but
the Arc de Triomphe has great separation.
Yes, they thought about it.
Yeah, the tunnel.
Great separation is the answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So with that, we've got the 10 questions.
Yep.
I don't know if there's any questions that have come in. There has, and they will be put right on the screen. I'm moving to the roundabout capital of the US next year. Who has far too many double lane roundabouts? Where should I start in convincing them to fix these mistakes? That's a good question. Well, I would start with the photo that we're going to show you on the screen. This is, it's probably going to be soon, or maybe it's already snowing in Minnesota, a good old snack down on a roundabout. This just shows you how much excess space there was on the roundabout and how much they actually didn't need. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a pole. I don't know if you can see this map. There's a post here, so that shows you where the island is, and everything else is just spare asphalt. So that's maybe keep an eye on the roundabout in winter. Take some photos and see how much of that double lane is actually used regularly. Anything else? Can you convert a two lane to a single lane roundabout?
Yeah, of course you can. If you just take out the middle lane,
right,
make the island bigger.
Just make the island bigger. Oh, easy.
Well, in most of the cases, I don't know how they connect.
Right. Yeah, they might have some.
Yeah, they might have
fast,
some going fast.
Yeah. Speaking of, on the screen, a good example of what we don't like, going fast roundabouts.
Yep.
Roundabouts designed for optimized speed. Where is this from?
This is in France, the city of Aubenas. So it's in the south of France. And well, this is just the typical roundabout in France. So they had the islands are actually more V's instead of what we see in the Netherlands, where you have a straight entry and exit.
Yeah, more squared off.
More squared off, so you really are at an angle of 90 degrees when you enter the roundabout. In this case, it's more like 30, 40, something like that. So that means that, well, they travel a lot faster. And you can see maybe a little bit that the color of the asphalt, you can see where cars drive and where they don't drive. So I think in the top right corner, you can see that they actually take the middle part, and the outer part is hardly ever used. So you can really see that it is actually designed at a too large of a scale. Yeah. And
then maybe you don't need snow, because I can imagine maybe it doesn't snow that much in the south of France.
No, it does get hot.
It does get hot. Yeah.
Maybe that helps with the asphalt coloring, but you can actually see that if you enter from the top left and you just turn right, then you hardly have to slow down at all.
Yeah, it's a nice speedy.
It's a nice turn for if you go like around 40 or something.
Yeah, which would be almost acceptable if it was just a highway or a giant giant roundabout at a high-speed intersection. But then you see the pedestrian crossing in the top right, and that's where I'm like, ooh, that looks scary.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to cross there.
No, you can imagine looking at those cars thinking, ooh, is that going to come my way?
Yeah.
And is it going to hurt? So that's a key difference, right? I mean, this is the shape of the island tells you if it's a well-designed roundabout or not.
Yep.
Right. This is the tangential, I can't say that word, versus the radial design. But there is hope for France, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think 2 kilometers away from the previous roundabout, they build a new one. So you do see the V's, but they're a lot less sharp, or a lot less, more like this instead of this. But they do have something to learn. But you can actually see that now in this, the left corner, you can actually see that it rounds off and then it goes like this again. Mm-hmm. So you have
a wiggle.
Wiggle. So that also shows you that they thought about how to slow down cars.
Right, it's not just one swoop.
You can just go in one swoop.
Right. Yeah. But there's still something wrong?
Yeah. there's still something. Well, at least in the top right, it's not really.
No ideal.
No, and the top, the bottom right also not.
Yeah.
And you can actually see also how people drive on it. You can see that people coming from the left and going to the right, so the top right, can actually go almost straight through.
Yeah. That's a very subtle bend out. Yeah.
Very subtle bend out.
And the cross, I can see that they're not quite aligned. Is that important?
You don't have to have them on opposite sides of them. That's not. Okay. But you do want to have like the wiggle that they have in it, so you don't want to have one continuous swoop.
Right. If we go back to this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see, you mean the swoops on the outer curbs. They're a continuous line instead of a bump. Yeah. Right. That's good. Let's see what else we have here. Oh yeah, we have a little tour. Do we have time? Yeah, we have, we're going a little bit over time, but we'll go for a few more minutes to show you a tour of some roundabouts that we found. And let's start, with this one. This is just going to be us freestyling on commenting on roundabouts on the fly. This one's from Leiden. I found this one when I was driving around Leiden. It's actually a turbo roundabout that has car priority, obviously, and it has, you can see a driveway in the bottom right and a right turn bypass. So it's actually a very high capacity, semi-rural setting. It'll be high car flow, but still at grade bike crossings on all sides. But they did do the right thing and not have bikes in priority. So this one's probably pretty much by the book, right?
Yeah, and they do have the bypass separated, so at a very large distance. So that also means that for the cyclists, they don't have to cross 2 lanes.
Yeah, you can see most of the exit lanes are actually 1 lane at a time.
Yeah, all of the exit lanes.
Yeah, except for the one on the left. A little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Almost. They were almost there. So close. So this is what a good turbo looks like, basically, right? Let me find one that is not so good. Oh, this one's great. So we fly all the way to the beautiful town of Pijnacker. Here you can see the difference, right? With the exits, especially on the bike path in the top left corner, you can see that the bikes actually have to cross 2 lanes at a time, and you can imagine that'll be reasonably high speed, especially for this setting where it's pretty rural. There was this one. This is probably my new favorite. we play the game, what's your favorite roundabout? And I found this one in Amersfoort, which I've never seen before. This one probably takes a little bit of explanation. But what you see is they had an at-grade crossing, but they wanted to increase the car capacity. So what did they do? They built a tunnel. And so there's a tunnel underneath the roundabout, but then they still had a level train crossing, which I find quite hilarious. And there's a lot going on in this situation. There's a bike lane in the bottom left. There's a street in the bottom right. There's a bigger arterial probably coming in from the south. Then there's 2 train crossings going straight through the roundabout. Then there's another service lane on the right, another bike lane, and then 2 more streets from the north. So this is pretty advanced roundabouting.
Yes.
But I do find it fantastic that they built a tunnel but left the train at the ground level.
Is there a traffic light for the train?
There is a traffic light for a train. Yeah,
Okay.
you can see the stop lines here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I guess it's not a very frequent train,
No, I hope not.
but it
This
is a.
very advanced roundabouting. Yes.
Don't try this at home.
No.
Would not recommend. Do we have your favorite roundabout? Ooh, do you want to? Oh, yeah. Where's the circular? This one. Right. So this is a very suburban roundabout.
Yep.
Do you like it?
Well, there's nothing wrong with it.
Zoom in a little bit.
I only think that the entry and the exit lane are quite far apart. So if the middle island between entry and exit was more close together, yeah, then
right.
it would have been better to slow people down, because now
Yeah.
I don't think, or at least you could have slowed people down more.
Yeah.
Because now you only have a small curve that you have to,
Right.
to make.
And
Yeah.
that's a really important
Yep.
lesson, right? Keep the center
Yep.
lanes close together. Maybe
Yep.
an island, or a couple of meters.
Yeah, an
but-
island like 2.5 meters
2.5.
For inside the urban area, and then
Yeah.
3 meters for outside.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But this big just separates them
Yeah.
too far, and it means that the turning radius.
Yeah. So
Right.
if you would have put them closer together at the roundabout, then you also had a curve in the road that would also
Yeah.
slow people down. So
Yeah.
that I
Missed
think that
opportunity.
would have been helpful. Yeah.
That's good. There is one that I wanted to talk about with a bus. Because can you do a roundabout when you have a bus lane? Well, the short answer is yes. There's multiple ways to do it, right? So
Yeah.
this is a roundabout in Zoetermeer. Well, Sweet Lake City, as we call it. I didn't want to say it, but I did. Here you can see that there's a very heavy bus lane, north-south, in both directions actually. And they built a dedicated bus bypass in this instance, which is
Yep.
obviously very comfortable for the bus.
Yep.
Anything else that stands out in this roundabout?
Well,
It's
the exit lane for the one going right is quite strange. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's odd.
That's odd.
Don't see that very often.
No.
No.
And I don't know what's happening with the blue lines, or at least the
Where's the blue light?
on the top.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a parking zone. Oh, there's a that's a
Just
side
a
street.
normal side street that
Yeah.
connects to the cycle path.
And then here's
That's
This is
why
good. You find funny things when you look
Yeah.
at.
that's why we have guidelines. and
That's
you
why
can
we have
just
They're not standards.
no,
They're guidelines.
they're guidelines, so you can see what works for you.
Yeah, anything goes. And then here another one with a tram instead of a
Yep.
bus lane. So obviously a tram is a challenge.
Yep.
There is the famous example from Delft with a well, we can look at it after this one.
Yep.
I found this one quite interesting because it is much more compact.
Yep.
Because it kind of fits nicely. Any disadvantages to doing something like this, where you have the tramway going through the middle of the roundabout? Here it splits in a T-junction, but
Yep.
you can imagine it's for one lane as well.
Yeah, it depends on how much tram traffic you have, I think.
Because otherwise it just shuts down.
Yeah. I think in the Delft case, I live in Delft, so I sometimes have to cross that roundabout as a cyclist. And because you always have priority, you hardly look at any traffic lights or something. You look at if you see another car. Yeah. You do look if you can safely cross, but then you hardly expect traffic lights to turn on, and that there's a tram coming through.
Because there's too little tram traffic. It's
so
not
then,
a high frequency.
Yeah. Well, you don't want a too high frequency because then the roundabout shuts down too much. But I think for cyclists, it's the hardest that there's a tram. Yeah. Because they really don't know. No, and there'll be a safety margin built into the lights, so they turn on too early, according to the cyclist, and then it gets a bit trickier. So there is downsides to it. Yeah. But it's possible. It is possible. It is in this case, maybe, it seems to work. It looks pretty nice. Yeah. Also, funny half turbo roundabout. Yeah. See with the turn-offs separated from the tram. I think that's for tram movements, I guess. So we can still go straight if the tram's coming. Yeah. And there is a plethora of roundabouts. We have probably time for one more, and then we really have to go. We have one a great one in here. Sorry, I have to this one. Yeah. just to end it on a funny note. What are we looking at? Well, it is a roundabout. It's a roundabout. Because there are traffic lights on it? No, I don't think so. There are no traffic lights. Yeah. There is great separation, as you can see. This is close to a place where they ship a lot of flowers, or there's a lot of truck activity. So that's why they had a great separation. There's a lot of traffic coming through this roundabout, and it's a turbo rotor roundabout, I think the technical term is. Because of the triple entry lanes. Yeah. Right. Then it becomes a rotor. Next level. Yeah. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. It is a bit excessive, maybe. Yes, and it's quite hard to navigate, I think. Yeah. And the downside to turbo roundabouts is that if you want to take a U-turn, that you can't. No U-turns. No U-turns on a turbo. No. Yeah, good point. Unless you pop over the barrier. If you go over a curb, I wouldn't recommend that. No. So if you do something like this, then it's really important to have good signage in front, like a couple of 100 meters before it, saying, okay, if you want to go this way, then you have to have this lane. Yeah. And sometimes they even write it on the street as well. In the pavement. Because you have to pick a lane well before you get to the roundabout. Yeah. No last minute. No, if you have a last minute think you can. No. See you later. Your car doesn't appreciate that. And the other important thing is, don't try this with bikes at grade. No way. No way. No way, no how. No. Definitely need great separation. Yeah. Well, that's a good advice to end it with, I think. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Eveline. I thought it was really interesting. I learned a few new things, so that's always nice. I hope you found it interesting at home as well. Thanks for registering with Mobicon Academy. We hope to see more of you in the next year. We'll be publishing a new webinar every week, so there'll be a pretty ruthless schedule, but it'll be exciting. For now, we wish you happy holidays. Take some time off in December, hopefully, and we hope to see you next year. So thank you for joining us tonight.